Ethan had always believed that silence could hold a home together. He thought love did not need loud words, big promises, or dramatic gestures. For him, love lived in routine in warm tea placed gently on the table before Clara woke up. In the quiet fixing of broken things, in remembering the way she liked her coffee without ever being asked. For years, that had been enough. Or at least, he believed it was. But that evening felt different from the moment he stepped inside the house. The air felt still, almost heavy, like something had already happened before he arrived. The living room lights were on, but the warmth they usually gave felt distant. Clara stood near the window, her back turned to him. She wasn't looking outside. She was just standing there. Ethan paused for a second, sensing something he couldn't explain. He placed his keys slowly on the table, his eyes fixed on her. "Clara," he called softly. She didn't turn right away. That alone made his chest tighten. When she finally faced him, there was something in her expression he had never seen before. Not anger, not sadness. It was something colder certainty. "I've been thinking," she said. Those 3 words felt heavier than they should have. Ethan gave a small nod, trying to keep his voice normal. "About what?" Clara took a breath, as if preparing herself for something she had already decided. "About my life. About us." Ethan's heart skipped, but he stayed calm. "Okay?" There was a long pause. The kind that stretches just enough to make everything feel uncomfortable. Then she said it. "I have the right to live my life the way I want, and you have to accept it." The words landed slowly but deeply. For a moment, Ethan didn't understand them fully. His mind tried to rearrange them into something softer, something less final. But they stayed exactly as they were. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Clara didn't hesitate this time. "I'm not going to stay stuck anymore. I want to go out, meet people, do what I want without feeling guilty." Ethan stared at her, searching her face for a sign that this was just frustration. Maybe something said in anger. But her face remained steady. "You're saying?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You want to live like you're not married?" She shrugged slightly, as if the question didn't matter much. "I'm saying I won't limit myself anymore." A silence filled the room again, thicker than before. Ethan felt a strange pressure in his chest. Not sharp, not sudden, but spreading slowly. He walked a few steps closer, trying to understand how they had reached this point without him realizing. "Did I do something?" he asked. Clara looked away for a moment. "This isn't about one thing." "Then what is it about?" He pressed gently. She exhaled, clearly tired of explaining. "It's about me feeling like I lost myself. Like I'm just living a life that doesn't excite me anymore." Those words hurt more than anything else. Ethan had spent years trying to build a stable, peaceful life for both of them. He thought that was what mattered. He thought comfort was enough. But now hearing her say that it wasn't exciting, it made everything he had done feel invisible. "I thought we were okay," said. Honestly, Clara gave a small, almost sad smile. "You were okay. I wasn't." That line stayed in the air between them. Ethan didn't know what to say next. He had always been good at solving problems, fixing things, finding answers, but this wasn't something he could repair with effort. "Is there someone else?" he asked quietly. Clara didn't answer directly. "That's not the point." But her silence said enough. Ethan looked down for a second, then back at her. His mind was racing, but his face stayed calm. He didn't want to lose control. Not like this. "So, what are you asking me?" he said. "I'm not asking," Clara replied softly. "I'm telling you. I'm going to live my life the way I want. You can either accept it or not, but I won't stop." There it was. Clear. Final. For a moment, Ethan felt like the ground under him had shifted. The life he thought was steady suddenly felt uncertain. But even then, he didn't react the way most people would. No shouting. No anger. Just a long, quiet breath. He looked at her one more time. Really looked this time. At the woman he had loved for years. at the person who now stood in front of him like a stranger with familiar features. "Okay?" he said. The word surprised even him. Clara blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. "Okay," Ethan nodded slowly. "If that's what you've decided?" There was something in his tone that made her pause. Maybe she expected resistance? Maybe she thought he would try to convince her to stay, to change her mind. But he didn't, and somehow that made the moment feel even heavier. Clara picked up her bag from the chair. "I'm going out tonight," she said. Ethan didn't respond right away. He simply stepped aside, giving her space to pass as she walked toward the door. She hesitated for a second, as if waiting for him to stop her. But he didn't. The door opened, then closed. And just like that, the house fell into complete silence. Ethan stood there for a few seconds, staring at the door. It felt strange, like something important had just ended. But there was no clear moment to mark it. He walked slowly to the couch and sat down. The ticking clock on the wall suddenly sounded louder than ever. Each second felt stretched, almost uncomfortable. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Memories began to come. One after another. The day he first met Clara. The way she laughed easily back then. The small moments that once felt meaningful, late-night talks, simple dinners, quiet mornings. When had all of that faded? Had he missed something? Or had it slipped away so slowly that he never noticed? Ethan rubbed his face with his hands, trying to clear his thoughts. But they kept coming. Maybe he had been too quiet. Maybe he had focused too much on stability and not enough on excitement. Maybe he had assumed that love would stay the same without needing change. But even with all those thoughts, one thing became clear. Clara had already made her choice. And for the first time, Ethan realized something uncomfortable. He had been holding on to something that was already gone. The realization didn't hit him like a shock. It settled slowly, like a truth that had been waiting for him to notice. He stood up and walked to the kitchen. Out of habit, he poured 2 cups of tea. Then he stopped. There was no one else there. He looked at the second cup for a moment, then quietly poured it back. The house felt different now. Not broken, just empty. Ethan walked back to the living room and sat down again. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't check his phone. He just sat there, letting the silence settle around him. And in that silence, something inside him began to shift. Not anger, not revenge. Something else, a quiet understanding he couldn't control. Clara's choices. He couldn't force her to feel something she didn't. But he could choose what he did next. That thought stayed with him. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His eyes focused but distant. For years, he had built his life around their relationship. Around making things work, around keeping things steady. But now, there was nothing left to hold together. And strangely, that gave him a kind of clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. Ethan took a deep breath and stood up again. The night outside was calm. The world hadn't changed. Only his world had. He walked to the window and looked out, watching the quiet street under the soft glow of streetlights for the first time in years. He wasn't thinking about what Clara needed. He was thinking about himself. What did he want? The question felt unfamiliar, but also necessary. Behind him, the house remained silent. Ahead of him, everything felt uncertain. But somewhere in that uncertainty, a small decision began to form. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. And as the night grew deeper, Ethan understood one thing. This wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of something he had forgotten to be himself. The next morning arrived quietly, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, touching the same furniture, the same walls, the same kitchen, but the feeling inside the house was different. Ethan woke up earlier than usual. He didn't stay in bed staring at the ceiling like he might have before. Instead, he got up, took a deep breath, and walked straight to the kitchen. He moved with purpose, even though he didn't fully understand it yet. He made tea, toasted bread, and stood there for a moment, looking at the empty chair across the table. For years, that chair had been Clara's place. This morning, it was just a chair. Clara walked in a few minutes later. Her steps were slower, cautious, like she wasn't sure what she would find. She expected tension, maybe silence filled with anger. But when she saw Ethan calmly preparing breakfast, she stopped. "Morning," he said without looking up. She blinked. "Morning." They stood there for a second, both unsure of what to say next. Ethan placed a cup of tea on the table and sat down as if it was just another normal day. Clara watched him carefully. "You're okay?" Ethan took a sip of tea before answering. "I'm fine." It wasn't said with emotion. It wasn't defensive. It was just simple. That simplicity made Clara uneasy. She sat down across from him, but the space between them felt wider than ever. She waited for him to ask questions, where she had gone, who she had met, what she planned to do next. But he didn't ask anything. Instead, he finished his breakfast quietly, stood up, picked up his keys. "I'll be out for a while," he said. Clara frowned slightly. "Out where?" Ethan shrugged lightly. "Just out." And then he left. Clara sat there staring at the door after it closed. Something about that moment didn't feel right. She had expected resistance. She had prepared herself for arguments, maybe even guilt. But this calm distance, it felt unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Ethan stepped outside and felt the fresh air hit his face. It felt different today. Lighter, somehow. He walked without a clear destination at first, just letting his feet take him wherever they wanted. For the first time in a long while. He wasn't rushing home. He wasn't thinking about what needed to be fixed or what needed to be done. He was just walking. He passed by streets he hadn't noticed before, small shops, quiet corners of the city that felt new, even though they had always been there. It made him realize how small his world had become over the years, limited to routines, responsibilities, and expectations. By the time he reached a small cafe, he stopped. He hadn't planned to go there, but something about the place felt inviting. It wasn't crowded, just a few people sitting quietly, lost in their own thoughts. Ethan stepped inside and ordered coffee. He chose a seat near the window and sat down, watching people pass by outside. It felt strange at first, sitting alone without a purpose. But slowly that feeling turned into something else. Peace. He took out his phone and scrolled through old contacts. Names he hadn't spoken to in years. Friends he had slowly drifted away from without realizing it. He hesitated for a moment, then sent a simple message to one of them. "Hey, it's been a while. How have you been?" It felt small, but it mattered. Over the next few days, Ethan kept moving forward in quiet ways. He started waking up early, going out more, keeping himself busy not to escape his thoughts, but to rebuild something he had lost himself. He joined a gym nearby. At first, it felt awkward, like stepping into a life that didn't belong to him. But he kept going. Day after day, he pushed himself not just physically, but mentally. He began to feel stronger, not just in his body, but in his mind. He also started reading again. Books he had once loved, but had forgotten over time. Stories that reminded him that life was bigger than the small space he had been living in at home. Things remained quiet. Clara continued living her life the way she had chosen. She went out often, dressed differently, carried herself with a new kind of confidence. But something had changed. Ethan wasn't reacting anymore. He wasn't watching her, he wasn't waiting, and that started to bother her more than she expected. One evening, she came home later than usual. The house was dark. She walked in expecting to find Ethan sitting somewhere, maybe watching TV or reading, but he wasn't there. She checked the bedroom, empty, the kitchen, empty for a moment. She stood still, listening to the silence. It felt strange before. She had wanted space, freedom, the ability to come and go without feeling watched or questioned, but now that she had it, it didn't feel the way she imagined. She sat down on the couch, looking around the quiet room. Something was missing, but she couldn't put it into words. Meanwhile, Ethan was somewhere else entirely. That night, he found himself at a small bookstore cafe across town. It was a quiet place, filled with soft music and the smell of old books. He hadn't planned to go there, but it felt right. He walked through the shelves slowly, his fingers brushing against the spines of books, reading titles. remembering how much he used to enjoy moments like this as he reached for a book on a nearby shelf. Another hand reached for the same one at the same time. They both paused. Ethan looked up. She looked up too for a second. Neither of them said anything. Then they both smiled, slightly amused by the small coincidence. "Sorry," she said softly. Pulling her hand back. "No, it's okay," Ethan replied. "You can take it." She shook her head. "It looks like you saw it first." Ethan smiled faintly. "We can both read it, just not at the same time." She laughed lightly, a soft, natural sound that felt easy to hear. "I'm Leela," she said. "Ethan." There was no awkwardness, no forced conversation. They simply stood there for a moment, then moved toward a nearby table together without even deciding to. They started talking. At first it was about the book, then about other books, then about life. The conversation flowed easily, like it didn't need effort. Lila had a calm presence. She wasn't trying to impress him or figure him out. She just listened, asked simple questions, and shared her own thoughts without hesitation. "You seem like someone who thinks a lot," she said at one point. Ethan smiled slightly. "Maybe too much." She tilted her head. "Or maybe just enough." There was something about the way she spoke that made him feel understood without needing to explain everything. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt something different. Not heavy, not complicated, just light. Back at home, Clara sat in the same spot, still staring at the quiet room. Time passed slowly, and with each passing minute, the silence felt louder. She looked at her phone, thinking about calling Ethan, but she stopped herself. Why should she? She had made her choice. But then another thought came. Why hadn't he called her? That question stayed in her mind longer than she expected. Late that night, Ethan finally returned home. He walked in quietly, not wanting to disturb anything. Clara looked up immediately. "You're back." He nodded. "Yeah, where were you?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Ethan placed his keys on the table. "Out, that was it. No details. No explanation." Clara felt something tighten in her chest. "Out where?" Ethan looked at her for a moment, then said calmly, "Just out." The same words he had used before, and somehow they felt different this time. Clara didn't ask again. Ethan walked past her, heading toward the bedroom. His steps were steady, his expression calm. But behind that calmness, something had changed completely. He wasn't the same man who had stood in that living room a few nights ago, trying to understand what was happening. He understood now. And more importantly, he stopped waiting. As Clara sat there, watching him disappear into the other room, a quiet realization began to form. In her mind, Ethan was no longer standing still. He was moving forward, and for the first time, she felt like she was the one being left behind. Clara sat in the living room that night, staring at the dark window. The streetlights outside flickered softly, and the quiet of the house seemed heavier than usual. She had spent the past few days going out as she pleased, chasing the freedom she thought she wanted, testing the boundaries she had set for herself. But now, in the silence, she realized something she hadn't expected. The freedom she sought didn't feel like freedom at all. It felt empty. She looked around the familiar walls, the furniture they had chosen together, the photos they had taken over the years. Everything was the same, but nothing felt right. The warmth she had taken for granted, the love she had ignored seemed distant, almost unreachable. Her heart ached in ways she hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, Ethan had been out again that evening. He had gone to the cafe he had discovered days ago. The small bookstore cafe where the smell of old paper and fresh coffee mingled in a comforting way. Lila was there, of course, sitting at their usual table by the window. She looked up as he entered, her smile gentle and welcoming. It was easy, natural, the way it had been since they first met. Ethan felt himself relax as he approached. He had spent weeks rebuilding himself, learning to stand firm in his own identity rather than bending to the whims of someone else's desires. And in Lila's presence, he didn't have to explain anything, didn't have to defend himself. He could just be. The thought brought him a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Back at home, Clara tried to distract herself by going through some old photos they had taken together. She paused at one of them, the two of them laughing on a trip they had taken years ago. She remembered how happy they had been, how close they had felt. That closeness had disappeared slowly, almost imperceptibly, till she hadn't even noticed the distance growing between them. And now, with Ethan moving forward with the quiet confidence he exuded, she felt something unfamiliar, a pang of longing, a recognition of what she had lost. The next morning, Clara tried to act as if nothing had changed, as if her actions hadn't caused the shift that had occurred. She expected tension, maybe frustration, from Ethan. She walked into the kitchen, expecting him to glare, to ask pointed questions, to express his disappointment. But he wasn't there. The house was quiet. She felt a strange sense of unease. Where was he? Her mind raced with possibilities, but none of them brought comfort. She realized for the first time that she didn't control his movements anymore. He didn't exist in her orbit the way he used to. That realization was unsettling, almost frightening. She had expected freedom to feel empowering, but instead, it made her confront something she hadn't wanted to face. Ethan had begun to reclaim himself, and she wasn't part of that journey. By midday, Ethan returned home. He walked through the door with a calmness that made Clara's heart skip. He carried himself differently now, a quiet confidence that had developed over days of rediscovery and self-reflection. He wasn't angry, he wasn't confrontational, and he wasn't waiting for her to explain herself. He simply was. Clara watched him as he set down his bag, noting the subtle changes, the way he moved, the firmness in his posture, the clarity in his eyes. It was clear that he had grown beyond the version of himself that had once been entwined so deeply with her decisions. For the first time, she truly understood that he didn't need her validation to exist fully. Clara took a deep breath and spoke, her voice soft, almost vulnerable. "Ethan, can we talk?" She felt her heart racing, uncertain how he would respond. He looked at her, steady and composed, and nodded. There was no anger in his gaze, no bitterness, just a quiet clarity that unnerved her. I didn't realize what I was losing," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I thought I needed something else, but I think I was wrong." Ethan listened silently, allowing her words to flow without interruption. Her admission carried weight, but it wasn't enough to erase the weeks of distance and self-growth he had experienced. He had learned to stand on his own, to find peace in himself. And that newfound strength changed the dynamic between them entirely. "I see you now," Clara continued, her voice trembling, "and I feel like I don't know you anymore." Ethan's eyes met hers, filled not with anger but with understanding. He spoke slowly, carefully, choosing his words with intention. "I didn't change overnight, Clara. I just stopped losing myself." Those words struck her deeply. She realized that while she had been chasing excitement, he had been reclaiming his identity. The man she once knew, the man who had quietly bent himself to the life they shared, had grown into someone unrecognizable. Someone she could no longer take for granted. Tears welled in her eyes as she asked the question she had dreaded. "Is it too late?" Ethan paused, considering his response. He wasn't angry and he wasn't spiteful. He spoke with honesty, the kind of honesty that came from understanding one's own worth. "I don't know," he said, "but I do know this. I deserve to be with someone who chooses me, not someone who asks me to accept being second." The words hung in the air, a quiet but firm boundary that clarified everything between them. Clara felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. Realizing that freedom without consideration had consequences she hadn't foreseen. Over the following days, the quiet tension continued. Clara reflected on her decisions and her motivations. She had wanted excitement, variety, the feeling of being in control. But now, confronted with Ethan's calm strength and the life he was building independently, she understood the depth of what she had lost. Her freedom had come at the cost of intimacy, of shared trust, of the quiet yet profound connection they had once nurtured together. She began to see that her pursuit of self-interest had left her isolated, while Ethan's pursuit of self-respect had strengthened him. It was a painful contrast, one she hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, Ethan's life continued to shift. He met Lila again at the small cafe bookstore, where they had first connected over the accidental touch of a book. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, covering literature, life experiences, and quiet reflections on the world. Lila's calm presence and genuine interest allowed Ethan to explore his thoughts without judgment. It was a stark contrast to the tension that had filled his home life. With her, he felt the possibility of connection without compromise. The possibility of love built on mutual respect and understanding rather than obligation or expectation. Each meeting reminded him of what it felt like to exist freely, to choose companionship rather than submission to another's whims. As days turned into weeks, Clara observed the changes in Ethan with a mixture of admiration and unease. She saw the quiet confidence he had developed, the self-assuredness in his gestures, the way he interacted with the world with renewed purpose. She realized that the man who had once waited silently, constrained by her desires, had transformed into someone she no longer fully recognized, but in recognizing him anew, she also recognized the depth of her loss. Her attempts to control her own path had inadvertently given him the space to reclaim himself. And that reclamation had changed everything. She felt a longing for the version of him she once knew. But she understood intellectually that he was no longer bound to her choices. He had grown beyond the life they had shared. One evening, Ethan returned home after meeting Lila. Clara was sitting quietly, the weight of the house's silence pressing on her. She observed him as he entered, noting the calmness in his movements, the clarity in his gaze. She realized she had expected confrontation, perhaps questions or resentment, but none of that came. He simply existed, firm in his identity and unshaken by her presence or absence. The contrast between the man she had known and the man before her now was undeniable. It was as if he had stepped fully into himself, and she could no longer anchor him to her world. Clara spoke again, her voice carrying a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to express. "Ethan, I didn't realize what I had. I thought I needed something else, but now I see that I may have lost what mattered most." Ethan listened with patient attention, allowing her to speak without interruption. He felt empathy for her realization, but he also recognized that empathy did not require action or forgiveness. He had learned to stand firm in his own life, and that life no longer revolved around her choices. Her acknowledgement of loss mattered, but it did not change the trajectory of his personal growth. Ethan finally spoke, his words measured and deliberate. "Clara, I appreciate your honesty, but I cannot return to the person I was, nor can I undo the growth I've achieved. I need a life where I am chosen willingly, not accepted begrudgingly." The clarity of his statement underscored the transformation he had undergone. He no longer sought approval or validation. He sought authenticity, mutual respect, and genuine connection. This understanding marked a profound shift in their relationship dynamic, a shift Clara could feel in the quiet, heavy spaces of the home they once shared.